Hey y'all, this is Mrs. Megan. I never thought I'd be in this situation, but my son kicked me out at dinner telling me you don't belong here. What he didn't know, I sold the house. Years of neglect, and now I've had enough. You won't believe how deep the betrayal goes. Family? They've been lying, taking from me, and I'm done. You think you know the story, but trust me, you haven't heard the worst of it. What happens next will shock you. Are you ready to hear the truth? I stood in the kitchen, carefully stirring the pot on the stove, the scent of simmering stew filling the air. The evening light filtered in through the window, casting long shadows across the room. The clock on the wall ticked slowly, reminding me that dinner was approaching. But it wasn't just any dinner tonight. It was a family dinner, a chance to celebrate Ryan's promotion. Ryan, my son. He was in his mid-30s now, doing well in his career, but the distance between us seemed to grow with each passing year. I had always been there for him. I sacrificed everything for his future, his education, his safety, his happiness. I worked long hours, often juggling 2 or 3 jobs at a time, just to make sure he never wanted for anything. But lately, it felt like he barely noticed me. I watched as he moved further away from me, his calls becoming less frequent, his visits more and more infrequent. I wasn't angry, just resigned. I did my best to keep the bitterness at bay. I kept telling myself that he was busy, that he had his life to live. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the ache, the feeling of being invisible. The table was set, the plates neatly arranged, and I had a small gift wrapped in plain paper for Ryan. I wanted to show him that I cared, that I was proud of him. I hoped this dinner would be different. I hoped tonight, just for once, I could feel like I mattered to him. But as the evening drew nearer, I knew that hope was just that. Hope. The house was already bustling by the time I walked into the living room. Ryan's friends were gathered around the coffee table, chatting and laughing, glasses of wine in their hands. Their voices rose and fell in casual conversation, and for a moment, I felt like an outsider, but I tried to ignore it. I was family. I belonged here, right? I walked into the dining room where the spread was laid out, but before I could sit down, Ryan's voice cut through the air, harsh and sharp. "You don't belong here," he said, almost casually, as if the words didn't matter. I froze. The gift in my hand felt suddenly too heavy. The sting of his words hit me harder than I could have prepared for. My own son, my flesh and blood, had just told me that I didn't belong in my own home. The room fell silent for a moment, and I stood there, clutching the gift, my mind racing. Was this really happening? Was this what my life had come to? All the years of sacrifice, the love, the care, and this was the thanks I got. A simple dismissal in front of strangers. I tried to breathe, but the air seemed thick. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to shout, to cry, to confront him, but instead, I stood there, the weight of it all sinking in. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was just hurt. Hurt in a way I had never imagined. Ryan turned his back to me, his focus back on his friends, as if he hadn't just shattered something deep inside me. His friends chuckled, oblivious to the pain they had just caused, but the smile on my face faltered, and I quickly turned to leave the room. As I walked away, I could hear the laughter fade behind me, but the sting of Ryan's words stayed with me, deep in my chest. I couldn't breathe. I walked to my bedroom, shut the door, and collapsed onto the bed. My hands trembled as I held the small gift, the paper now wrinkled from the grip I had on it. I stared at it, and suddenly, everything felt like it had been a lie. All those years of working, of putting him first, of loving him with everything I had. And for what? To be told I didn't belong? To be dismissed like I was nothing? Tears welled up in my eyes, but I quickly wiped them away. I wasn't going to cry. Not yet. Not for him. I had given him everything, but in that moment, I realized that I had been giving to the wrong person. I had given him everything, but what had I kept for myself? What had I built for me? The questions swirled in my mind, but the answers were elusive. How long had I been taking this? How long had I let him walk all over me? How long had I let myself be invisible? I sat up, staring at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was a stranger. She wasn't the proud mother I had always thought I was. She wasn't the strong woman who had raised a son to be successful, to be kind, to be proud. No, she was someone who had been silenced, someone who had been neglected for far too long. The tears finally came, but they weren't just for Ryan. They were for me, for the woman I had lost along the way. I took a deep breath, the tears stinging my eyes. I wasn't going to let this define me. I wasn't going to let him break me. I had spent my whole life building something for him, for us. But what about me? What was I going to build for myself now? I grabbed the gift, stood up, and walked out of the room. My mind was made up. I turned my back on that house, my house, and knew things would never be the same again. I stood outside my house, the cold night air biting at my skin as I stared at the lights shining through the windows. It felt like the walls were closing in on me, and I had nowhere to go. The quiet of the night seemed too loud, too much to bear. My breath hung in the air, each exhale a reminder of how hollow I felt inside. Ryan's words echoed in my mind, over and over again. You don't belong here. It hit me like a slap across the face. I thought back to the years I had spent raising him, making sacrifices, always putting him first. But it seemed that none of it mattered anymore. I had given him everything, and in return, I had been dismissed like I was nothing. The very son I had nurtured, loved, and sacrificed for was the one who rejected me. I leaned against the railing of the porch, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. How had things come to this? How had I allowed myself to become so invisible? For a long time, I had accepted the fact that my family was my purpose. They were my life, my everything. But standing there, in the cold night, I realized something had shifted. I wasn't just hurt, I was angry. Angry at myself for allowing this, angry at Ryan for treating me like this, and angry at the years I had wasted, thinking that love meant submission. I had been silenced for so long. But now, standing outside my own house, I realized that I didn't have to be silent anymore. I didn't have to stay in this prison of my own making. The bitterness started to mix with something else, something unexpected, a glimmer of hope. Maybe it was the moonlight that gave me clarity, or maybe it was just the simple fact that I was still standing here, still breathing. But in that moment, I knew I couldn't go back inside. I couldn't let Ryan's words dictate my worth. I had to make a change. I thought about the years I had spent sacrificing my dreams for them. I had put my own hopes and desires on hold, always believing that one day they would appreciate me, one day they would understand. But now I saw the truth. They weren't going to change. They didn't even see me. I could hear the laughter from inside the house, the voices of people celebrating Ryan's success. But all I felt was an emptiness, a hollow ache that couldn't be filled by anyone but me. I walked to my car, feeling the crunch of the gravel under my shoes, and drove aimlessly around the block. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I didn't know where I was going or what I was doing, but I knew I couldn't stay there. The next morning, I woke up to the sunlight streaming through my bedroom window. I hadn't slept much, my mind still racing, still replaying the events of the night before. But as I sat up in bed, I felt different. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for so long was lighter now. I had made a decision, even if it wasn't fully clear yet. I walked into the kitchen, the familiar smell of coffee filling the air. I could hear the sounds of the city waking up outside, but inside, everything felt quiet. I sat down at the table, sipping my coffee, my thoughts running wild. What was I going to do now? I took out a notebook, a habit I hadn't done in years, and began to jot down some thoughts. I didn't know where to start, but I knew I needed to take control. I glanced at my bank statement. I had saved a little over the years, but it wasn't enough to live comfortably on my own. I had some assets tucked away, nothing extravagant, but enough to give me a start. I made a note to go to the bank later and inquire about liquidating some of it. It was a small step, but it was a step. I thought about my dreams, the things I had put on hold. When was the last time I had done something for myself? When had I last considered my own happiness? Anger began to swell inside me again, but this time, it wasn't directed at myself. It was for all the years I had spent being ignored, being invisible. I was angry at Ryan, at my family, but most of all, I was angry at the woman I had become, the woman who had allowed this to happen. I slammed the notebook shut, feeling the weight of my decision. I wasn't going to live like this anymore. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of empowerment. It wasn't a huge leap, but it was a start. I wasn't going to just stand by and let life happen to me. I was going to take control. The phone rang just as I was about to leave for the bank. I glanced at the caller ID and saw a name from the past, an old friend from my church who I hadn't spoken to in years. I hesitated for a moment before answering. Ms. Megan? It's Rachel. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. I smiled, even though she couldn't see it. No, not at all. It's good to hear from you. Rachel's voice was warm, and it made me feel a sense of comfort I hadn't realized I needed. I heard you were looking for a new job, and I just wanted to let you know that there's an opening at my company. It's nothing fancy, but it could be a good place for you to start fresh. I felt a surge of hope flood through me, like a weight lifting from my chest. This was it. This was the break I needed. I wasn't sure if I would take it, but the fact that it was even an option felt like a sign. As the phone call ended, I stared at the walls of my home and realized, for the first time, I had a choice. The morning light slanted through the blinds, casting a soft glow over my kitchen table. The cup of coffee in front of me was still hot, but I wasn't in any hurry to drink it. My fingers traced the rim of the cup absent-mindedly as I stared out the window, watching the world go by, feeling like I was stuck in time. It had been a long night. I hadn't slept much. My mind kept replaying Ryan's words. You don't belong here. That moment of rejection was like a jagged shard lodged deep in my chest. But this morning, there was something different in the air, something I hadn't felt in years, a flicker of hope. I wasn't sure what had changed overnight. Maybe it was just the passage of time, or maybe it was the realization that I could no longer let this go. But standing there, I knew I couldn't let my son's words define me. I couldn't let my family's neglect make me small anymore. As I sat there, trying to focus on the present, my mind drifted back to the years I had spent giving everything to my family, never asking for much in return. My sacrifices were endless, my love constant. But when had it all become so one-sided? When had I stopped being a person and become just a caretaker? I had poured my heart into raising Ryan, and this rejection, was the price I had paid. But now, something inside me had shifted. I wasn't willing to let myself be invisible anymore. I stood up, my legs a little shaky, my heart racing, and walked over to the sink. I stared at my reflection in the window, the woman I barely recognized staring back at me. Who had I become? And more importantly, who was I going to be? I wasn't sure what my next move would be, but I knew it was time to stop waiting for things to get better. I had been silent for too long. I had allowed my family to treat me like a shadow in my own life, but I wasn't going to let that continue. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my decision settling in. I wasn't just angry anymore, I was determined. Later that morning, I drove myself to the lawyer's office, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The drive was quiet, the weight of the decision ahead heavy on my shoulders. I wasn't sure if I was ready, but I had to try. The office was small, the air stale, and the fluorescent lights above buzzed with a low hum. I sat down across from a lawyer named Mr. Harris, a man in his late 40s, his hair thinning and his glasses perched precariously on the bridge of his nose. He smiled at me, but it didn't reach his eyes. I wasn't here for pleasantries. I was here to take control of my life. We discussed my finances, my house, my assets, everything I had worked for. As he spoke, I felt the fog of uncertainty start to lift. There was a certain power in knowing what you were dealing with. It was a small victory, but it was mine. I had something to fight with. "You have every right to protect yourself," Mr. Harris said, looking at me over his glasses. "Your home, your finances, they're yours. You don't need anyone's permission to take care of yourself." I felt a wave of relief wash over me, though it was tinged with guilt. I wasn't used to thinking this way. For so many years, I had been the one who gave, the one who sacrificed. It felt strange, even wrong, to think of taking something back for myself, but it was time. As I left the office, the sun was high in the sky, the day stretching out before me. I had the tools I needed to move forward. I felt a spark inside me, a fire that had been smoldering for years finally catching flame. I walked to my car with purpose, but inside, I was still conflicted. The guilt was there, a shadow I couldn't quite shake. What would Ryan think when he found out I was taking control? What would my family say when they saw that I wasn't just going to sit back and let them walk all over me anymore? But I knew one thing for sure. This was my life. I was the one who had to live it. And for the first time in a long while, I felt ready to fight for it. As I drove home, my thoughts were a mix of fear and excitement. I had made my decision. I wasn't just going to sit in the shadows anymore. The next steps would be hard, but I was prepared. When I got home, I sat on the couch, taking a moment to breathe. I picked up the phone and scrolled through my contacts. There were people I could call, people who had always supported me, people I had forgotten about in my quest to be everything to my family. But now, I was going to reach out. The phone rang a few times before someone picked up. It was Rachel, an old friend from church. I hadn't spoken to her in years, but I knew she'd be able to help me find my way. "Miss Megan, it's Rachel. How have you been?" We talked for a while, catching up on old times, and then Rachel mentioned something that made my heart skip a beat. "I heard there's an opening at a company I work with. Nothing fancy, but it's a good place to start fresh. It could be a chance for you to get back into the world. You know, something new. A new beginning." I couldn't believe it. This was the opportunity I needed. I wasn't sure if I was ready, but I knew I had to at least consider it. As the phone call ended, I stared at the walls of my home and realized, for the first time, I had a choice. The morning light was gentle, filtering through the kitchen window, casting long shadows across the counter. The house was silent except for the steady tick of the clock on the wall. I sat there, my hands wrapped around the coffee mug, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying the conversation from last night. The sting of Ryan's words still echoed in my head, reverberating through every inch of my body. "You don't belong here." I hadn't asked for much, had I? Just a seat at the table, a little respect, a small recognition of all the years I had given. But I hadn't gotten it. I glanced down at the mug, the warm liquid swishing slowly in the cup, as I thought about the choices in front of me. Should I confront my son now, or should I just leave it all behind? For a moment, it felt easier to do nothing, to simply continue being the silent witness to my own life, to the distance that had been growing between us. But that feeling of being invisible, it was unbearable now. It wasn't just about Ryan anymore. It was about me, about who I had become. I had spent my life making others my priority, sacrificing everything for my family. But now, I saw clearly. If I didn't take control, no one else would. A deep breath left my chest, and the decision was made. I stood up, leaving the empty mug behind. I wasn't sure how I would do it, but I knew it was time. Time to break the silence. The house felt different today. It was as though the air itself had changed, like something was shifting. I walked into the living room and sat on the couch, hands clasped tightly together. The clock on the wall ticked on, but the minutes felt like hours. I had been silent for so long, but now, I had to find my voice. I needed to talk to Ryan, and I needed to do it now. It had been years since we'd had a real conversation. Years of me giving, of me loving, of me doing everything I could to hold our family together while they all moved on without me. But now, I was done. I stood up and grabbed my purse, walking to the door. As I stepped outside, the cool air hit me, and I felt the familiar weight of the world press down on me. But it was different now. I wasn't carrying the weight for everyone else anymore. I drove over to Ryan's place, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't believe I was actually going to do this, but it had to be done. I had to stand up for myself. I had to reclaim my power. The house was quiet when I arrived. I knocked, my breath caught in my throat as I waited for Ryan to answer. When he opened the door, there was that familiar look in his eyes that used to look at me with warmth, but now seemed cold and distant. "Hey, Mom," he said, stepping aside for me to come in. We didn't hug. We never really did anymore. It was just one of those things that had slipped away, like so much else. I stepped inside, feeling the weight of the decision I had made settling around me. "Ryan, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady but firm. He frowned, glancing away as if he was already preparing for some sort of conflict, but I wasn't backing down this time. Not anymore. "Mom, can't this wait?" he said, sitting down on the couch and leaning back, his eyes avoiding mine. He didn't even bother to look at me when he spoke. "No, it can't wait," I replied, sitting across from him. I stared at him, not allowing myself to be dismissed this time. "You can't keep treating me like I'm invisible. I've spent my life giving, doing everything for this family, but I've never once asked for anything in return." Ryan's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. "What do you mean?" he asked, though his voice had already dropped into the defensive tone I had grown so accustomed to. "I mean you and everyone else," I said, holding my ground. "I've always been here, Ryan, always. But last night, when you told me I didn't belong at that dinner, it hit me like a slap in the face. You think I owe you everything, but I'm not a martyr. I'm your mother, and for the first time in my life, I'm not going to sit back and let you treat me like I don't matter." Ryan's expression faltered, and for a moment I thought I might have gotten through to him. But then he shrugged and looked away. "I didn't mean it like that, Mom. You know I love you." I couldn't believe my ears. "Love me?" I echoed, incredulous. "Is that what you call love? Treating me like an afterthought, taking me for granted, and dismissing me when I finally try to stand up for myself? No, Ryan, this is not love. This is manipulation." I stood up, my hands trembling with anger. "The house is sold. I'm taking control of my life. I don't need permission, and I sure as hell don't need your approval." Ryan stood up then, his face reddening with a mixture of anger and confusion. "What the hell do you mean the house is sold? You didn't consult with me. You just—" "No, I didn't," I interrupted. "And I don't need to. This is my decision, Ryan. I'm tired of being silenced, tired of being the one who sacrifices for everyone else and gets nothing in return. I'm done." The room fell silent for a moment, and I could feel the weight of the moment, the years of tension between us boiling over. But this time, I wasn't backing down. I wasn't going to let him guilt-trip me into submission. I had spent my life letting others take from me, but no more. "I'm done," I said, my voice clear. "I'm done being quiet, done being invisible. I've been patient for too long, but this is where it ends. I'm taking my life back, and this time, no one is going to stop me." Ryan's face twisted with frustration, but I could see the fear in his eyes too. Fear of losing me, fear of what it would mean if I really did take control. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of him, not of anyone. I turned to leave, but before I reached the door, Ryan's voice stopped me. "Mom," he said softly, but there was nothing behind it. Nothing that could change my mind now. "I'm done," I said again, and I walked out the door. I could feel the weight of his disapproval, but this time, it didn't matter. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was finally taking my power back. The stillness in my kitchen was suffocating. It was already evening, and the soft, dim light from the kitchen lamp made everything feel heavier. The world outside my window seemed distant, almost unreal, as if it was happening somewhere else. Inside, however, the weight of my thoughts was undeniable. The events of the past few days had left me exhausted, emotionally drained, but also stirred something in me that I couldn't ignore. I sat there at the table, my hands wrapped around the mug of tea I hadn't yet touched, thinking about the choice I had made. It felt like I was standing at the edge of something big, something I couldn't walk away from anymore. What I had done with Ryan, what I had said, there was no going back. It was done. My thoughts drifted back to the dinner, to the silence that had followed my words. That moment still burned in my chest. "You don't belong here." No one had ever really seen me, not for years. Not for the woman who had worked tirelessly, who had sacrificed everything for her family. I had given up parts of myself that I could never get back. And Ryan? My own son. He was the one who had hurt me the most. It wasn't just the words, it was the way they had been spoken. Like I was nothing, like I didn't matter. I had spent so much of my life making myself invisible for the sake of my family, and now that invisibility had turned into a quiet rage I couldn't contain. The silence, my silence, had to end. I placed the mug down on the table, its surface still warm beneath my fingertips. I had to do something. I couldn't keep hiding in the shadows of my own life. It was time to stop pretending, to stop making excuses. I stood up, walked over to the window, and stared out. The moon was barely visible, but the darkness stretched on, offering no comfort. But it didn't matter. I'm not hiding anymore. The thought was both terrifying and liberating at once. My breath caught in my chest as the weight of the decision started to settle in. There was no going back now. I knew what I had to do. It was time to take my power back. The next day, I sat in the living room, staring at the phone in my hand. I had made the call, and now they were coming. The rest of the family, Ryan, his wife, the others, were coming over for a meeting, a confrontation of sorts. I could feel the nerves tightening in my stomach, but I pushed them down. This wasn't about fear. This was about something I had been waiting for my whole life. A chance to be heard, to be seen. The doorbell rang. My pulse quickened. I walked to the door, opening it slowly. Ryan stood there, his face hard, his eyes scanning me. Behind him stood his wife, Emily, looking as detached as usual. "Mom," Ryan said, his voice flat. "What's this about?" I stepped aside, motioning for them to come in. "Please, sit down, all of you." They did, and there was a heavy silence that followed. And the tension in the room was thick, but I wasn't backing down. I wasn't going to let them control the situation anymore. I took a deep breath and looked at Ryan first. "I'm tired of being treated like I don't matter," I began, my voice steady but sharp. I've spent my entire life making sure you had what you needed, giving and giving, and you've never once respected me for it. Ryan opened his mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. Let me finish. I've been quiet for far too long. I've been patient and understanding, but this stops now. The house is sold, Ryan. I've made my decision. This is my life now, and I'm not asking for anyone's approval anymore. His eyes widened. What? You're selling the house? He spat. Why didn't you talk to me first? That's our home, Mom. This house was ours, but it's mine now, and I don't owe you anything. I've given you everything, but no more. I will not be silenced anymore, I said, my voice rising, the anger I'd been holding back for so long now spilling out. Ryan shook his head, his voice low but tinged with frustration. I don't get it. You're acting like this is some sort of betrayal. You didn't even ask me, Mom. You never even consider how I feel. Why would you do this? Because I matter, Ryan, and I'm done pretending I don't. I've been invisible in this family for too long. I've let you push me around, dismiss me, and ignore me. But no more. Ryan's face twisted with anger, and I could see the defensive wall going up. But I wasn't afraid anymore. You can be angry, you can yell, but it's my decision, and I'm done asking for your permission. The room was silent except for the heavy breathing between us. The rest of the family sat there, their eyes flicking between me and Ryan. I could feel them all weighing the situation, but none of them said a word. I'm done being the one who always gives, I continued. I've spent years giving everything I had to make sure you all were okay, but it's time for me to focus on myself. It's time for me to live my life. I'm not going to sit back and let you all walk all over me anymore. Ryan looked at me, his face softening for a brief moment. I didn't mean to hurt you, Mom. But I couldn't let him finish. Not this time. You have hurt me, and I've been quiet about it for too long, but I'm not doing that anymore. I deserve respect. I deserve to be heard. I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest. The words had been said. There was no going back now. Ryan opened his mouth again, but I wasn't going to let him speak. Either you start respecting me, or this family will never be the same. This is my boundary. Take it or leave it. They didn't say anything for a long moment. I could see the anger in Ryan's eyes, but there was something else too. Something like fear, or maybe realization. Either way, it didn't matter. I had drawn the line, and I wasn't backing down. As I stood there, feeling their eyes on me, I realized I had done something I never thought I could. I'd crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. And for the first time in my life, I felt the power of standing firm in my own truth. The light from the early morning sun filtered through the bedroom window, casting long shadows across the room. I sat there, on the edge of the bed, staring at the empty space across from me. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, each one sharper than the last. This was the moment. There was no more room for hesitation, no more time to second guess. I knew what I had to do, and I had to do it now. The decision wasn't easy. It never would be. But the weight of the past, the years of neglect, the dismissals, the hurt, everything had built up to this point. For so long, I had kept quiet. I had swallowed my pride, allowed myself to be invisible, all in the name of family. But no more. My silence had only allowed the disrespect to fester. I was done. I thought about the last conversation with Ryan, the harsh words he threw at me. You don't belong here. They echoed in my mind like a cruel reminder of how far apart we had drifted. But this time, it wasn't just about the words. Well, it was about everything I had sacrificed and never received in return. I couldn't keep allowing this to happen. For once, I had to stand up for myself. I had to make it clear that I mattered, that my needs, my life, my decisions were just as important as anyone else's. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision settle into my chest. It was time to confront him. Time to confront all of them. By noon, I was sitting in my living room, waiting. My hands were clammy, but my resolve was ironclad. I had called Ryan earlier, told him to come over. This wasn't going to be another one of those conversations where I held back, afraid of stepping on toes. This was going to be different. I wasn't the same woman anymore. The doorbell rang. I stood up slowly, my heart racing in my chest. There he was, standing in the doorway, my son, looking at me with that familiar, guarded expression. "Mom," he said, voice flat. "What's this about?" I motioned for him to come inside. "Sit down, Ryan. We need to talk." He stepped in, eyes narrowing as he glanced around the room. The tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating, but I wasn't backing down. Not now. "Look, I know you're upset," he began, his voice defensive. "But this? Don't," I cut him off, holding up a hand. "Just listen to me, okay? I've spent my entire life making sure you were okay, that the family was okay. I've put my own needs aside so many times that I don't even recognize myself anymore." He opened his mouth to speak, but I wasn't finished. "I let you and everyone else treat me like I was invisible, and I was okay with that for a long time. But I'm done now. I'm not asking for your approval anymore. I'm not asking for anything." Ryan's jaw tightened, and I could see the anger flaring in his eyes. "You think I've never appreciated you? You think I've never cared?" I stood up, my legs steady, my back straight. "No, Ryan, you haven't. Not in the way I needed you to. Not in the way I deserved. And now I'm not going to stand here and pretend that I haven't been treated like dirt for far too long." He opened his mouth to say something, but I cut him off again, this time with a sharper edge in my voice. "The house sale. That wasn't just about business, Ryan. It was about me taking control of my own life for the first time in years. I don't need your permission, and I don't need anyone else's to do what I've already decided." Ryan stood up quickly, his voice rising. "You don't get it. You're abandoning the family for your own selfish reasons." I felt my heart pound in my chest, the pain of his words stabbing at me, but I stood my ground. "Selfish? I've given everything for this family. I've put up with years of disrespect, of being ignored and taken for granted. This isn't about me abandoning anyone. It's about me finally putting myself first." The words hung in the air, thick and heavy. I could feel his anger, but I wasn't backing down. I wasn't going to let him manipulate me into silence again. "I'm done being invisible, Ryan. I'm done being the one who always sacrifices. I have needs too, and I will not be treated like a second-class citizen in my own family anymore." Ryan looked at me, his face a mixture of shock and fury. He opened his mouth to speak again, but this time, I didn't let him. "You can be angry. You can hate me for all I care, but this is the truth. I'm not going to be pushed around anymore. I deserve respect. I deserve to live my life without feeling guilty for every decision I make." Ryan stood there for a moment, his face red with frustration. But then something shifted. Maybe it was the truth in my words, or maybe it was the realization that I wasn't going to give in. He turned, storming out of the room without another word. I stood in the silence of the room, my chest rising and falling with each breath. I had done it. I had finally said what needed to be said. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace washing over me. The decision had been made, and I was no longer going to live in the shadows of my own life. But just as I turned to leave, I caught sight of the mailbox outside. There was a letter waiting for me. I walked to the door, opened it, and stepped outside. The letter was from the bank, confirming the sale of the property. The confirmation wasn't just business, it was a final piece of closure. I stood there, staring at the paper in my hands, feeling a sense of freedom flood through me. No matter what happened next, I was free. For the first time, I was no longer trapped by my past or by the expectations of others. As I turned to go back inside, I knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was ready. I had taken my first step into reclaiming my life. The morning light seeped through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the kitchen. The silence in the house felt deafening. I sat at the table, staring at the coffee cup in front of me, my fingers absent-mindedly tracing the rim. My mind was exhausted, but there was something else there too. A quiet strength, a resolve. It was time to finally put an end to this. After the confrontation yesterday, everything felt different. The world seemed to have shifted on its axis. I could feel the weight of the choices I'd made, pressing down on me like a 1,000-pound stone. The house was gone, my son was furious, and the world as I knew it was falling apart. But it was still mine to control. The past few years, hell, the past few decades, had been a blur of pain and sacrifice. My entire life had been wrapped up in doing for others, caring for my son, sacrificing my own dreams to make sure he had a better life. But in all that time, I had lost myself. And now, as I sat here in the kitchen, the realization hit me like a freight train. It was time to stop pretending, stop living for someone else. I thought about my mother's words, spoken to me when I was just a girl. Sometimes you have to love yourself more than the people who don't love you back. She'd said it in the calmest voice, but it had stuck with me all these years. I had loved my son more than I ever knew how to love myself. But now that had to change. I could feel the sharp sting of betrayal, of walking away from my son, but deep down, I knew it was the right thing. He wasn't the same person I raised, and I wasn't the same mother. This was no longer about him. It was about me. That afternoon, I stood in the living room, waiting. The clock ticked slowly, each second dragging like it was the longest moment of my life. My son had called earlier. He wanted to talk. At least that's what he said, but I knew better. This wasn't going to be a conversation where we hashed things out. This was going to be the final showdown. The doorbell rang, and I didn't move. I didn't need to. I already knew what was coming. Ryan stepped through the door, his eyes already full of anger. He didn't even look at me. "You've ruined everything," he spat. "The house, the family, this is all your fault." I stood tall, refusing to let his words chip away at me. "I'm not doing this for you anymore, Ryan," I said, my voice firm, unwavering. "I did what I needed to do for myself." He sneered at me. "You think this is easy? You think I'm just going to let you walk away from everything we've built?" I met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "I didn't walk away from anything. I'm just stepping into my own life. I'm taking back what I've given up for years." Ryan took a step forward, his voice growing louder. "You're throwing it all away for what? A house? A piece of property? You've ruined us." I felt the anger building inside me, but I controlled it. This time I wouldn't let him manipulate me, guilt me. "No, Ryan," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm finally standing up for myself. I'm not your punching bag anymore." His face twisted in disbelief. "You're really doing this? You're choosing yourself over your own son?" I held my ground. "I've spent my whole life choosing you. It's time I choose me." The silence between us was thick, charged with years of unspoken words. He opened his mouth to say something, but I stopped him before he could speak. "I've given everything, Ryan. Now it's my turn." He stood there, seething with anger. I could see his jaw clench, his fists tightening at his sides. But I wasn't afraid of him anymore. The power had shifted, and for the first time in a long time, I felt it. As Ryan stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him, I stood in the middle of the living room, my heart racing. But there was no fear, only resolve. I had made my choice. It was done. I walked to the front door, staring out at the driveway. The world seemed to be holding its breath. The house, once a place of warmth, felt empty. It was just brick and mortar now, a symbol of everything I had sacrificed and everything I was leaving behind. As I stepped outside, the cool air hit me, but it felt freeing. For the first time in years, I was breathing without the weight of the past crushing me. I made my way to the mailbox, my heart pounding. When I saw the letter inside, I knew. The sale had gone through. The house was officially no longer mine. And for the first time, that didn't feel like a loss. It felt like freedom. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the silence wash over me. The finality of it all was overwhelming, but it was also empowering. I had done it. I had taken control of my life. I turned around and walked back up the driveway, my steps steady, my heart lighter than it had been in years. But as I reached the door, I paused. This was it, the beginning of something new. But what would it bring? Peace? Regret? There were no guarantees, no promises, just the unknown ahead. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me, knowing that there was no going back. Whatever came next, I was ready. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains of my small apartment, casting a pale glow on the room. It was quiet, too quiet, and the stillness felt like a weight pressing down on me, as though the world was holding its breath. I sat at the small kitchen table, a cup of coffee before me, still steaming. The steam curled upward, disappearing into the air like the fleeting thoughts in my mind. I hadn't slept much. The decision I made, walking away from my son, from the life I knew, still echoed in my bones. The silence between us was deafening, but it was necessary. I stared at the cup, swirling it gently, and then, in a moment of clarity, I remembered something my grandmother once told me. Sometimes, love means letting go. The words echoed in my mind, as they always had when I needed them most. I thought of my son, of the years I had spent raising him, and how that love had shaped my every decision. But now, that love had to shift. It had to be for me, for my peace, my well-being. But even with that clarity, there was pain. It wasn't easy to let go of a relationship that had defined so much of my life. The guilt crept in, like an old friend, reminding me of everything I had done for him, of the sacrifices made. And yet, the weight of those sacrifices had grown too heavy. The years of giving everything I had, only to be met with anger, manipulation, and indifference. Those years had to end. I knew it wasn't just the house that needed to be let go of. It was everything. The constant battle for respect, the silent suffering, the unspoken hurt that festered in the cracks of our relationship. I had spent too long pretending things were okay, too long sacrificing my own happiness for the sake of someone who didn't seem to care. But now, for the first time in my life, I was choosing myself. A few days later, I found myself sitting alone in a small cafe, the weight of everything heavy in my chest. The conversation I had with my son, the one that had broken everything, still played over and over in my mind. I couldn't go back. I couldn't undo what had been done. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. I didn't even have to look at the screen to know who it was. Ryan. I let it ring, but after the third call, I sighed and picked up. Mama. His voice cracked, a mix of anger and desperation. We need to talk. Please. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar tug of guilt. But it wasn't enough to change my resolve. I don't think we have anything left to say, Ryan, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I've made my decision. There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing, the anger seeping through even in the silence. You don't understand, he finally said. You've ruined everything. I felt my chest tighten, but I didn't flinch. No, Ryan, I replied, my voice growing stronger. What's been ruined is the life I've been living for you. I've spent my whole life trying to fix things, trying to make you see. But now, I'm fixing myself. You're just giving up on me, he shot back. You're leaving me to deal with all of this on my own. I felt the old anger bubbling up, but I suppressed it, choosing my words carefully. I've given you my love, my time, and my heart. But now, I'm giving myself something I've never had. Freedom. The line went silent. I could hear his breathing, deep and ragged. But I wasn't sorry. I couldn't be. The next day, I stood in my apartment looking at the sun setting through the window. The light cast long shadows on the floor, but I felt no fear. This was it. The moment that would define the rest of my life. I had made my decision. There was no turning back now. I picked up my phone and dialed Ryan's number one last time. This time, there would be no more conversations where I backed down, no more empty promises. When he answered, his voice was tight with anger. But I stood firm. I'm done, Ryan, I said, the words falling heavy between us. I'm choosing myself now. You're walking away? He asked, his voice breaking. Just like that? I nodded, though he couldn't see me. Yes, just like that. I'm done with the guilt, the manipulation, the hurt. I've given you everything I had. It's time I take care of me. There was a moment of silence, followed by a sharp intake of breath. I don't know what to say to you anymore, he muttered, his voice low. You don't have to say anything. I've made my choice. As the conversation ended, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Relief. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I just felt free. But as I hung up the phone, I knew the hardest part was yet to come. I had severed the tie, but the grief, the emotional weight, would still follow me. I wasn't sure where this decision would lead, but I knew one thing for certain. It was the right path for me. I stood up and walked to the door, grabbing my coat. As I stepped outside, I looked around. For the first time, I didn't feel trapped. This was it, the beginning of something new. The first rays of sunlight poured into the apartment as I slowly opened my eyes. The room was quiet, the kind of stillness that felt almost unnatural, but not unwelcome. The day was new, and it was my first day fully on my own. The past few weeks had been a blur, filled with heartache, anger, and decisions that I never thought I'd have to make. But here I was, waking up in a new space, alone for the first time in so long. The silence was both deafening and peaceful. As I sat up, my body still felt the weight of everything that had happened. The pain of severing ties with my son was still fresh, and the guilt threatened to creep in again. But today, for the first time, I didn't let it. I had chosen this, chosen myself. And that choice wasn't easy. I thought back to the day I stood my ground, telling Ryan I was done. It felt like a lifetime ago, but it was only a few days. I could still hear his voice, pleading with me, trying to guilt me into forgiving him. But I hadn't budged, and I wouldn't. I reached for the family photo on the table next to me. It was a picture of a different time, a time when everything felt whole. But now, that picture just felt like a memory, a relic of a past life I had to let go of. The weight of the years I spent trying to fix what was broken in that family, trying to be the glue that held it all together, had become too much. You don't owe anyone your peace, my mother's voice whispered in my mind. I could hear it as clear as if she were standing right next to me. It was the same advice she'd given me so many times, but it had never truly sunk in until now. She was right. I didn't owe anyone my peace, not even my son. And with that, I took a deep breath and closed my eyes, letting the quiet settle over me. It was the beginning of something new, something I wasn't entirely sure I was ready for, but something I knew was necessary. The phone call came a few hours later. It was him, Ryan. He wanted to meet. My heart sank at the sound of his voice, so familiar and yet so distant now. "I've been thinking, Mama," he said, his tone a mix of frustration and desperation. "I'm sorry. I want to fix this. We need to talk." I felt a wave of emotion flood through me. Anger, sadness, the familiar tug of guilt. But I refused to let it pull me back into the cycle. I had made my choice. "No, Ryan," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "We've talked enough. I've made my decision. I can't keep doing this." He paused, and when he spoke again, it was with a mixture of disbelief and hurt. "So, that's it. Just like that? You're walking away from everything?" "Everything?" I echoed, incredulous. "I'm not walking away from you, Ryan. I'm walking away from the pain, from the cycle of you using me, from the disrespect. I'm walking away to find my own peace. And that's something I can't do if I keep trying to fix you." "Don't do this, Mama," he pleaded. "You can't just throw everything away. Don't you get it?" I snapped, my voice finally breaking. "I've spent my life trying to build a future for you, and you've spent yours tearing me down. That ends now." He was silent on the other end. I could feel the anger simmering inside him, but for the first time, I didn't care. I wasn't afraid of losing him anymore. I had already lost him in all the ways that mattered. "I'm done trying to fix this," I said. "You have to fix yourself. I can't keep living like this." There was a long pause before he muttered, "I don't know how to fix this." I didn't answer. Instead, I hung up the phone. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of clarity wash over me. The decision had been made. I had chosen myself. I spent the rest of the day walking around the city, lost in thought. The weight of what I had done still lingered, but there was something freeing about it too. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had control over my own life. I walked into the park, the evening air cool and refreshing. The sun was starting to dip below the horizon, casting a golden hue over everything. As I strolled along the path, I felt a sense of peace begin to settle in. The decision I had made was final. But then, as if the universe was testing me, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, and there was a message from Ryan. "I'm sorry, Mama. I don't understand, but I'm sorry. I don't want to lose you." I stared at the message for a long time, my fingers hovering over the screen. There was a part of me that wanted to respond, that wanted to soften, to reach out. But then I remembered everything. The years of manipulation, the guilt trips, the sacrifice. I deleted the message. I stood there for a moment, letting the weight of the decision settle over me. This was my life now, my choices, my peace. I looked up at the horizon, the sky streaked with the last light of day. There was a sense of finality to it, a recognition that I had made a choice that could never be undone. But there was also something else, hope. For the first time in a long time, I was free.